Tyres, tyres, tyres. It's time to talk tyres with Paul Hembury. We're just outside Pirelli, and Paul, they have been the talking point as they were at the beginning of last season. Let's just start with decisions here, and your decision to, well, it was after Malaysia, I'm right in saying, that you decided to switch the compound.
The Sunday night after Malaysia, we thought, you know, that race went ahead with really not too many issues, so we thought we'd bring the same combination here, being very similar in terms of temperature and quite an abrasive track.
How have you responded to certain amounts of criticism from certain parts and certain teams about the way that the tyres are performing this year?
It's really bizarre because behind the scenes we've actually got a lot of lobbying for people telling us not to change things. So you've got there's obviously a media sort of led point of view which comes from the drivers, and then behind the scenes we've had a lot of lobbying. I think there's now 8 teams that have come to us, written to us, emailed us and said whatever you do, don't change anything. Right. So we're in a bizarre situation, really.
Yeah, I'm talking to drivers. When we were in China, after qualifying, we had the three drivers up there. Lewis sort of said that he thought that, I think he was saying it to Fernando, he seems to be the best guy that looks after his tyres. Is this a factor, that there is a difference between certain drivers that can actually do a better job than others?
Well, that's certainly the case. You know, a driver, well, it's good that it's the case in reality, because the driver has an input, and there are differences, as I think you've seen, really, between teammates as much as is the best descriptor, because between cars, as you know, it's really often very hard to understand what are the real differences.
There's arguments for and against, obviously, Paul, as there are always with tyre debates. I suppose if you're looking from a fan's perspective, we're getting great racing. We understand that, and it was the same last year. But from the driver's perspective, Jenson Button, you know, you cannot race this guy. You're not racing this guy. The difference in strategies, which is, again, that's made it fairly exciting. But some of the drivers having to go around about 70%.
Yeah, well, you race to the package you've got. You know, in this case, it's tyre limited in some cases. I mean, it's been like that through history in many ways. You'll still find at the end of the race it's going to be the fastest car and the best driver on the day. So, you know, it's a bit like saying could I have another 100 horsepower more. You know, these engines could easily give you more. So it's where you want to take it. I mean, we got asked to replicate Canada 2010. I mean, if you remember that race, you know, that was quite a novel race compared to the way or the format of races during that period of time. And that's the input we've had, and the impact, you know, we've been told to continue giving.
And I think one thing we had, Simon, back in sort of the late 80s, early 90s, when we used to race Bridgestone, you had a similar situation there, that they were good for about 2 or 3 laps. There was a bit of a drop, and one guy who's very famous for looking after them, Alain Prost, the professor, was good at actually massaging them back. Now, it's something that I think we're starting to see again this time around. Is that what you see?
That is the case. I mean, there was also brakes were, you know, at one stage in the history, you know, you had to look after your brakes and then you could go strong. I mean, Nigel Mansell himself was famous charger, wasn't he? And he could only have done that by managing his race. And you see it in other sports. Valentino Rossi was very famous for charging through the field. So, you know, that is an aspect that's there. It doesn't mean to say that everything's perfect. You know, we get to see the cars like everybody else in Melbourne. So we've seen the development this year on some cars has been vast, much more than anticipated. Last year we were probably looking at 1 second between 16, 17 cars in Q2. This year there's a big gap, almost up to 2 seconds. So the guys at the front are pushing a lot harder than we saw last year.
The degradation though in China, Paul, on the softs, I mean, nigh on, well, just about less than a second a lap. We saw it. Yeah. Was it too much?
Well, we intended that really to be almost like a quali tyre. You know, it was to push the people. They needed to use it to get the time. And then you found at the start of the race they had to pit early, and the hope there was more of the Q2 teams had taken the harder option. They didn't actually, and we were surprised by that, because that would have enabled them to gain position on the circuit and would have made it harder or made it more interesting as the Q3 guys come charging through. So that was the idea. It wasn't intended really as a race proposition.
Everyone's in it together. I mean, we all want the best for racing. How do you go about developing your compounds throughout the season now? Are there little tweaks and adjustments as we get into Europe?
Well, I think, you know, we will do a review actually after the race here on Sunday night, and we'll probably decide what we're going to do Monday, Tuesday before we get to Spain. You've got to be careful, because if you make changes during the season, say for example we made a change and 1 or 2 teams suddenly made a big jump forward, you'll be now asking me saying, well, look, yeah, you've just favoured a few other people. So you're in a bit of a no-win situation. You've got to be really careful, because if that does happen, then you know you are influencing the championship. If we make changes, we've got to make it early on. You don't want to be doing anything after 8 or 9 races, because again that's going to favour probably 1 or 2 teams. And also bear in mind, we're having the same conversations last year, and by the end of the year nobody was talking about it. You know, the teams have the best engineers in the world. The drivers are there at the top for good reason. You know, they're intelligent people. They work out how to get the best out of the package, and you'll see the same. You'll see the same as we go forward.
I'll be interested on both your takes on this as well. Lewis Hamilton saying that he's having to adjust his technique. He's had to learn a couple more techniques